I told my son I was broke on a Sunday afternoon in September, not dramatically, not with tears or a shaking voice or any of the theater that a lesser man might have reached for. I told him the way you tell someone a fact that has already settled in you, quietly, across the kitchen table, with my hands around a coffee mug and the afternoon light coming through the window over the sink. I said, Kevin, I have to be honest with you, the business is gone, the savings are almost gone with it. I am going to have to sell the house. I watched his face. And my son, my 43-year-old son who I had raised in that house, and who had learned to ride a bike in that driveway, and who had sat at that same kitchen table every Sunday for the first 18 years of his life, said one word before he could stop himself. He said finally. And then he caught it. He rearranged his face into something that looked like concern. He said he was sorry, that was the wrong word, that he just meant he was relieved, it was out in the open, that he wanted to help, that we would figure it out together. He talked for 4 minutes in the careful register of a man walking back a word that had already landed. But I had heard it, one syllable, pure and unguarded, the sound of a man who had been waiting for something for a long time, and had just been told it was finally here, finally. I was not broke. I had not lost the business. The savings were fine. I had been testing him. And he had just failed in the most specific and irreversible way a test can be failed, which is the way where the answer comes out before the person realizes they are being asked. What I heard the next morning, when he thought I was asleep, was worse than finally, worse by a distance I am still calculating. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and let's get into it. My name is Leonard Marsh. I am 66 years old, and I live in Columbus, Ohio, on a street called Fairfield Avenue, in a craftsman house that I have owned since 1991, 33 years, long enough that the neighbors who were young when I bought it have grandchildren now, who play on the same sidewalk. I built a small commercial cleaning company called Marsh Professional Services in 1994, started with 1 van and 2 employees, and grew it over 28 years into an operation with 41 employees, 12 vehicles, and contracts with office buildings and medical facilities across central Ohio, that I am proud of, in the way you are proud of something that required everything you had for a very long time, and did not break you. My wife, Gloria, died 4 years ago. A fast cancer, 6 months from the first symptom to the end, the kind that moves so quickly, there is no time to make peace with the pace of it. She was my partner in everything, not just in the personal sense, but in the literal one. Gloria handled the administrative side of Marsh Professional Services for 22 years, and the combination of her organizational mind and my operational one was the reason the company was what it was. After she was gone, I kept running the company for 2 more years, and then I sold it, in 2022, for a number that surprised even me, to a regional facilities management group that had been watching us for several years. That I am going to tell you that number eventually. It is relevant. Kevin is my older son, 43, lives in Dublin, Ohio, 20 minutes from my house, works in real estate development, a job that suits him in the ways that jobs suit people who are good at identifying what things are worth, before other people realize it. He is smart, and he is charming, and he has his mother's eyes, which I mention because those eyes have made it harder to see him clearly for longer than I should have allowed. My younger son, Daniel, is 39. He lives in Cincinnati, 3 hours south, works as a hospital administrator, calls me on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, because he decided that was the schedule, and has kept it for 6 years, without missing a call, except once, when his youngest was born, when he called from the delivery room at 11 at night, to tell me, and to apologize for the irregular timing. Daniel is the kind of man who apologizes for calling from a delivery room, which tells you almost everything you need to know about Daniel. Daniel did not know about the test. I want to be clear about that. Nobody knew about the test except me. Not my accountant, not my attorney, not my friend Bernard, who has known me since 1987, and who I told eventually, but not until everything was already done. The test was mine, constructed alone, over a period of several weeks in the late summer, because something had been accumulating in me for long enough that I needed to know if what I suspected was true before I built anything in response to it. What I suspected had started small, a comment Kevin had made in passing about the Fairfield Avenue house, that it was a lot of house for one person, that the neighborhood had appreciated significantly, that had I thought about what I wanted to do with it long term. A question about the business sale, how the proceeds had been structured, whether it was a lump sum or an installment arrangement. A conversation with Daniel, who had mentioned offhandedly that Kevin had called him to talk about Dad's finances, just checking in, just making sure everyone was on the same page. Daniel had not found that conversation unusual. Daniel found most things Kevin did not unusual, because Daniel had always given Kevin the benefit of the doubt, in the way that younger siblings sometimes give older ones, a generosity that Kevin had been cashing without depositing for most of their adult lives. I found it unusual. I found the accumulation of small financial curiosities unusual, in the way that a man who built a business from one van finds accumulations unusual, which is to say I noticed the pattern before I had named the pattern, and once I named it I could not unname it. So I built the test. I had my accountant prepare a document, a single page, that showed a fictional version of my financial situation, not a crude forgery, a plausible one, with numbers that told a story of a business sale that had gone poorly, a savings drawdown over the subsequent 2 years, and a current picture that was, while not destitute, sufficiently thin. That selling the house would be an obvious and necessary conclusion for a man looking at it clearly. The document was for context for myself, so that when I sat down with Kevin I had thought through the numbers carefully enough to be consistent and convincing. I called Kevin on a Friday and asked if he could come by Sunday. Family dinner, I said, just the two of us since Daniel was in Cincinnati. He said of course and arrived on time, which Kevin always did when he thought something might be happening. We ate, we talked, we cleared the plates and sat with coffee the way we had been sitting with coffee on Sunday evenings since Kevin was old enough to drink it. And then I told him, the business is gone, the savings are almost gone with it. I am going to have to sell the house. Finally, one word unguarded true. The 4 minutes of recovery after it were almost more revealing than the word itself, because I could see the work he was doing, the calculation of what I had heard, the decision to fold the word back into something manageable, the performance of the concern that followed. I have been watching people calculate things my entire professional life, and Kevin was calculating fast but not fast enough, and the calculation was legible to me in a way it might not have been to someone who did not know him as well as I did. We talked for another hour after that. He was helpful and warm and practical, all the things a son should be when his father delivers difficult news. He said he wanted to look into some options. He said not to make any decisions too fast. He said he had some contacts in real estate who could tell us what the house was worth if we decided to go that direction. He said we. I told him I appreciated it. I thanked him for coming. I walked him to the door. After he drove away, I stood at the kitchen window for a while. Then I went to bed. I want you to sit with the space between Sunday evening and Monday morning, because that space is where this story turns into something I had not expected to be sitting with even after the word finally. I had thought the test ended Sunday. I had thought what I needed to know was whether Kevin would say something true when the news hit him, whether the mask would slip enough to see the face underneath. And it had. And I had seen it. And I had believed that was the shape of what I was dealing with. I was wrong about the shape. Monday morning showed me the rest of it. If you are with me, drop a comment, hit that like button. Because what I heard through the kitchen window at 8 in the morning while Kevin thought I was still asleep is why this story does not end with the word finally. I am an early riser. Have been my entire life the residual discipline of running a cleaning company where the first crews went out at 5:30 and the phone started ringing at 6. Retirement did not change the biology of it. I wake between 5 and 5:30, regardless of what I did the night before, and by 6 I am in the kitchen with coffee, and usually a book. Kevin had stayed in the guest room. He had offered late in the evening, after the conversation had wound down, and I had said of course, the guest room is always ready, and he had taken me up on it, in the casual way of a man who has a plan for the morning that is easier to execute from 20 feet away than from Dublin. I was in the kitchen at 6. Kevin did not know I was in the kitchen at 6. The guest room was at the back of the house, and between that room and the kitchen there was a hallway and a closed door, and Kevin had been sleeping in this house long enough to know the layout, but apparently not long enough to remember that sound traveled from the side yard through the kitchen window, in a specific and clear way, when someone stood on the flagstone path alongside the house to make a phone call with some privacy. He thought he was outside the house. He was outside the walls. He was not outside my hearing. I heard him dial. I heard him say good morning. In the clipped, businesslike way he uses, with people he does not need to perform warmth for. And then I heard the conversation that I have been replaying in my head at odd hours ever since. He said, "So he is selling the house?" "Yeah, it is confirmed. He told me last night." A pause. I know, listen. Before he gets a realtor involved, I want us to be positioned. The Fairfield Avenue address, that lot size with the original structure. In this market, it moves between $850 and $900. Maybe higher if we present it right. Another pause. Dad is not going to know the difference. He has not sold a house in 30 years. If we come in at $750, presented as a fair market offer from a family contact, he signs and we flip it inside of 90 days for a $200,000 margin. I stood at my kitchen counter, and I did not move. He said, "The business proceeds?" "I am still working on that angle. I need to see the actual sale documentation." He mentioned it did not go as well as he hoped, which means there is probably some of it left, and if he needs help managing it, which at his age he will, I want to be the help he calls. Another pause. "Daniel is not going to be a problem," Kevin said. And his voice had gone quieter, but the window carried it clearly. "Daniel trusts me. He always has. I will handle Daniel. I will handle Daniel. My younger son. The one who calls on Tuesday and Thursday. The one who called from the delivery room to apologize for the irregular timing. I will handle Daniel." I stood in my kitchen with my coffee mug in my hand and I felt something go very quiet in the center of me. The way things go quiet when something that was uncertain becomes certain. When a shape you suspected solidifies into a thing with edges and dimensions and a name. The name was not a legal term. It was a simpler word. The word was betrayal. Not dramatic betrayal, not the betrayal of a villain, but the specific and domestic betrayal of a man who had looked at his aging father and seen an opportunity, and had been positioning himself around that opportunity for long enough that he had a number in mind and a partner on the phone and a plan for what to do about his brother. I put the mug down on the counter very quietly, and I stood in my own kitchen until I heard Kevin come back inside. He said good morning with the warmth of a man who has just had an excellent phone call and is feeling good about the week. I said good morning and poured him coffee and set it on the table and sat down across from him. I said, "Kevin, I have been thinking about what I said last night." He looked at me with the attentiveness of a man who is listening for specific information inside a general sentence. "I think I need a few weeks before I make any decisions." I said, "I want to call an estate attorney and I think I should talk to Daniel." Something moved through Kevin's face that was not quite disappointment and not quite alarm. A recalculation, a timeline being adjusted. "Of course," he said, "absolutely, take all the time you need." He left after breakfast. I went to my desk and picked up the phone, but I did not call an estate attorney first. I called Daniel. Daniel picked up on the second ring. It was a Tuesday, which meant it was one of his scheduled evenings, but it was 8:30 in the morning and he heard something in my voice immediately. He said, "Dad, what happened?" I told him all of it. The test, the Sunday dinner, the word finally, and the Monday morning phone call through the kitchen window. I told him what Kevin had said about the house. I told him the number Kevin had in mind and the margin he was planning to make. And I told him the last part, the part about Daniel himself. Daniel was quiet for a long time after I finished. The particular quiet of a man who is absorbing something about someone he has trusted his entire life. "He said he would handle me?" Daniel said finally. "Yes," I said. Another silence. "Dad," Daniel said. How much did the business actually sell for? I told him. The line was quiet for a moment. I heard him exhale slowly, the breath of a man doing math in his head and arriving at a number significantly larger than he had been led to expect by a brother who had been managing his information. He told me you were struggling, Daniel said 6 months ago when he called. He said the sale had barely covered the debts and that you were worried about the house. He told you that 6 months ago, I said. Yes, 6 months ago. Kevin had been building the story with Daniel the same way he had been building it in every small financial question he had asked me over the past year. A consistent and patient construction, the kind that takes time and requires maintaining two separate narratives simultaneously, one for the father and one for the brother. Both of them calibrated to produce the same outcome. A father who believed he had nothing and a brother who believed the same. So that when the opportunity arrived, either of them would question the number Kevin brought to the table. Daniel said, "What do you need from me?" "I need you to keep this between us for now," I said, "and I need the name of a good attorney in Columbus if you have one." He had one. Of course he did. Daniel was the kind of person who always had the name you needed before you knew you needed it. Not because he was calculating, but because he paid attention to the world around him and filed things away in case they became useful. The attorney was a woman named Joyce Brewer, who had an office on High Street in Columbus, and who specialized, according to Daniel, in estate planning and the specific category of situations where estate planning intersected with family members who needed to be managed out of positions they had never been entitled to occupy. I called Joyce Brewer that same morning. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Marsh, I need to ask you one question before we go any further. Do you have any documentation of the actual business sale? The real numbers?" "I have the complete closing documentation," I said, "and I have an accountant who has managed my books for 14 years. "Good," she said, "and the conversation you heard Monday morning, did you record it?" I had not thought to record it. I told her that. She was quiet for a moment. "All right." The word "finally" from Sunday, combined with the phone call content and the documented financial reality, gives us a clear picture even without a recording. What I want to do is build a complete and accurate asset picture that is in writing, signed, notarized and filed, so that there is no version of events in which the real numbers can be disputed later. She paused, "And I want to revise your estate documents before Kevin takes any further steps, because based on what you have described, he is moving on a timeline." "How soon can you see me?" I said. "Tomorrow morning," she said. 8 o'clock? I was there at 7:45. Joyce Brewer in person was exactly what her phone manner had suggested, precise, unhurried, and operating with the specific calm of a woman who had seen this situation enough times to know exactly where each step went, without needing to rush any of them. She had a yellow legal pad and a good pen, and she wrote in a small, clear hand that covered the page efficiently. I told her everything again, in order, and she wrote steadily. When I finished, she turned to the second page and began a list of what she needed from me. The business sale documentation, the complete asset picture from my accountant, the current estate documents, and a written account of the Sunday dinner conversation and the Monday morning phone call, dated and signed, and as verbatim as I could make it. "The written account of the phone call," I said. "How much weight does that carry without a recording?" "Combined with everything else, significant weight," Joyce said. "You are not filing a criminal complaint, Mr. Marsh. At least not yet. You are establishing a documented record of your actual financial position, and revising your estate documents to reflect your actual intentions. The phone call documentation is supporting context, not the foundation. The foundation is the numbers." The numbers were substantial. Joyce had my accountant on the phone by 10 o'clock, and had a complete picture of my assets by noon. The business sale, $1.8 million, structured as a combination of cash at closing and a 5-year earnout, the first 2 years of which had already paid. The Fairfield Avenue house, valued per an independent appraisal Joyce commissioned that week, at $910,000. Retirement accounts, savings and investments, an additional $800,000, accumulated across 35 years of careful and consistent management. Total picture, approximately $3.5 million in assets, conservatively valued, held by a man whom his son believed was broke, and about to sign a house over to a family contact for $750,000. I want to give you a moment with that gap. $750,000 offered as a fair market price on a house worth $910,000, which Kevin knew was worth at least $850,000, because he had said so on the phone. A $100,000 minimum spread in Kevin's favor, on a transaction he was positioning himself to facilitate, by being the first person to arrive with a number, before a grieving, trusting, presumably desperate father thought to get an independent opinion. Joyce revised the estate documents over the following 3 days. I want to tell you what changed and what did not change, because both parts matter. What did not change? Daniel's position. Daniel had been in my will honestly for 39 years, and nothing I had learned in the last week changed the honest accounting of my relationship with my younger son. His share remained as it had been, accurate and deserved. What changed? Kevin's position. Not to nothing. I want to be precise about this because the revision was not designed to punish but to be accurate, and accurate meant reflecting the relationship as it actually was, rather than the relationship Kevin had been cultivating in my direction. His share of the estate was restructured to a specific and documented sum, one that accounted for what I had already given him across his adult life in loans that had never been repaid, and support that had never been acknowledged, and which left him something without leaving him what he had been positioning himself to take. The Fairfield Avenue house was placed in a trust with Joyce as the independent trustee. It could not be sold without Joyce's written approval and an independent appraisal within 60 days of any offer. No family member could serve as the buyer or the buyer's agent on any transaction involving the house. The terms were specific and airtight, and Joyce had seen to it personally. Daniel was named co-trustee. I called him the day the documents were finalized and told him. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Dad, you didn't have to do that." "I know," I said, "that is why it means something." He laughed, small and real, the laugh of a man who recognizes a sentence he has heard before in a different form. The revised documents were signed, notarized, and filed on a Friday afternoon, 10 days after the Sunday dinner, when I had told my son I was broke, and he had said finally, before he could stop himself. On Saturday morning I called Kevin. "If you are still with me, drop a comment, tell me what you would have said in that phone call, hit that like button, because how I told him is the part of this story I spent the longest time getting right." Kevin answered on the first ring. He had been answering on the first ring all week, which told me he was monitoring the calls in a way he was not always careful to conceal. "Dad," he said, warm and immediate. "How are you doing? I have been thinking about you." "I am doing well," I said. "I wanted to update you on some things. Can you come by this afternoon?" "Of course," he said, "absolutely. What time works?" I said 3 o'clock. He was there at 2:55. He came in with the same practiced warmth he had been wearing since Sunday, the warm helpfulness of a man who believes he is managing a situation that is moving in his direction. He sat at the kitchen table. I put coffee in front of him. I sat down across from him. And then I said, "Kevin, I want to tell you something true before I tell you the rest. I love you. That is true regardless of everything else I am about to say, and I want you to hear it first so that everything after it is understood in that context." He looked at me. Something shifted in his face, a small involuntary movement, the beginning of understanding that this was not the conversation he had come for. "I was not broke," I said. "The business sale went well. The savings are fine. The house is not being sold under any circumstances that you are going to be involved in." Silence. "I told you I was broke because I needed to know something," I said. "And you told me, before you could think to manage what you were telling me. One word, Kevin, and it said everything." He put his hands flat on the table. He did not say anything. "And the next morning," I said, "when you were on the phone on the flagstone path, the window was open. I have been in this house 33 years. I know exactly how sound moves through it." Kevin's face had gone the specific pale of a man who is rapidly reconstructing an entire recent history, and finding that the reconstruction is not going in his favor. "Dad," he said. "The house is worth $910,000, I said. "I have an independent appraisal from this week. You are going to offer me $750,000 as a fair market price from a family contact. I know the number because you said it on the phone on Monday morning while I was standing at the kitchen counter." He did not try to deny it. I give him that. He sat at the table and looked at the coffee mug in front of him and did not try to construct a version of events in which what I had just said was not what had happened, which told me something about my son that I had not been sure of until that moment. That underneath the calculation there was still a person who knew when the calculation was over. "The estate documents have been revised and filed," I said. "Joyce Brewer on High Street handled it. The house is in a trust with an independent trustee in terms that make what you were planning impossible." I paused. "Daniel is the co-trustee." Kevin closed his eyes for a moment. "Did you tell Daniel about the phone call?" he said. "I told Daniel about all of it," I said, "including what you said about handling him." He opened his eyes. He looked at the table. A long silence. "Kevin," I said, "I am going to tell you what I told your brother when he asked what I needed. I need the truth, not a managed version of the truth. The actual shape of your finances, the actual debts, the actual situation. Because I think what I heard on Monday morning is the result of a man who is in over his head and has been looking at his father as a solution instead of asking his father for help. And those are not the same thing, and one of them I can work with and one of them I cannot." He looked at me. "Are you in trouble?" I said. A long pause. "The kind that has weight to it." "Yes," he said. "Tell me," I said. And he did. "Not everything. Not all at once. The way truth comes out when it has been compressed for a long time, slowly and with stops and restarts, and several places where he lost the thread and had to find it again. A development deal in 2022 that had gone wrong in the ways that development deals go wrong when the interest rate environment changes faster than the pro forma assumed. A second deal entered to cover the losses from the first, which had not yet resolved. Personal guarantees on both deals, which meant the exposure was not just professional but personal. He was not broke, but he was close enough to it to understand what broke felt like, and the distance between where he was and where he needed to be had made my house look like a bridge. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When he finished, I sat for a moment with what he had said. "You should have called me," I said. He looked at the table. "Not to take from me," I said. "To ask. There is a version of this conversation where you called me 8 months ago and said, 'Dad, I am in trouble, and I need help,' and we had a different 8 months than the one we just had." I paused. "I do not know if I would have helped you. I want to be honest about that. What you were planning, the house, the position you were building, that told me something about your judgment that I am still sitting with. But I would have listened. I would have had the conversation." Kevin put his hand over his eyes. He sat like that for a moment. "Dad," he said, "I am sorry." I looked at my son, 43 years old, with his mother's eyes and a bad deal and a worse plan and the specific exhaustion of a man who has been maintaining multiple false narratives for long enough that the maintenance itself has become its own burden. "I know you are," I said. "The will," he said. "What you changed." "It is accurate," I said. "It reflects the relationship as it is. If the relationship becomes something different over the next years, I will revisit it, because I am not interested in punishment. I am interested in accuracy. But accuracy starts today, with the truth, and the truth is that what you were planning was not the act of a son who trusted his father." He nodded. "The real kind." "Where do I start?" He said. "With your own attorney?" I said. "Tomorrow before anything else, and you tell them the full picture, not the managed version." He nodded again. "And then you call Daniel." I said. "Not me calling him to tell him what you said you call him." Kevin looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "He is going to be furious." "Yes." I said. "He is going to be furious, and then he is going to listen, because Daniel has always been better at both of those things than either of us gave him credit for." Kevin left at 5. I stood at the kitchen window, and watched him drive away, and then I stood there a while longer looking at the Fairfield Avenue street, the neighbors' houses, the maple tree at the edge of the yard that Gloria had planted in 2001, and which was enormous now in the way that maples get enormous when you are not paying close attention. I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. I told him Kevin was going to call. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How did he look when he left?" "Like someone who put something down that was very heavy," I said, and is not sure yet what to do with his hands. Daniel made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. "That sounds like him." He said, "Yes." I said, "It does." We talked for 40 minutes about other things, about his youngest who was walking now, about a hospital project he was managing, about the maple tree which he had not seen since summer, and which I described as getting out of hand in the specific wonderful way that maples do. When we hung up, I went to the back porch and sat in the chair where Gloria used to sit in the evenings, and I looked at the yard and the maple and the back fence, and I breathed for a while. The house was still mine. The documents were accurate. The number Kevin had planned to offer me was not the number that would ever appear on any offer sheet, because the trust terms made that conversation moot, and somewhere in Dublin, Ohio, my older son was sitting with the weight of what he had set down, trying to figure out what came next. I did not know what came next for Kevin. That was his work to do with his attorney and with Daniel and with the actual shape of his finances. Once the managed version was finally put away, I had made clear what I could work with and what I could not. The rest was up to him. What I knew was this: the test I had built had been more expensive than I expected, not financially, but in the specific way that clarity is always more expensive than uncertainty, because uncertainty lets you keep the version of things you prefer, and clarity makes you live with the version that is actually true. Kevin had failed the test, and then in the kitchen on Saturday afternoon he had done something that the test was not designed to measure, which was tell the truth when the truth was the only thing left to tell, without negotiating with it or managing it or softening it into something more comfortable. That was not nothing. That was not absolution. But it was not nothing. I went inside. I watered Gloria's houseplants. I made dinner at the kitchen table and ate it sitting down, which I do not always do, and I thought about a woman who had run the administrative side of a cleaning company for 22 years with a precision and a warmth that I had never been able to fully replicate, and who would have known, I suspect, before any of this started, what was underneath the small financial questions and the careful concern. She would have handled it differently than I did. Less of the long game, more of the direct conversation, more warmth in the confrontation, less architecture in the approach. She would probably have been right. But she was not here, and I had handled it the way I knew how to handle things, which was to build a structure, make sure it held, and document the results clearly. The results were documented, the structure held. That was enough. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment changed the air in the room for you. Hit that like button, subscribe if you are not already here, and I will see you in the next one. And if you have been waiting to find out what is actually underneath the warmth of someone who asks too many questions about your finances, let me tell you something. A man who built a company from one van learned in the kitchen on a September Sunday, you do not need a recording. You just need to say the wrong thing with enough conviction. The truth has a way of answering before the person realizes they are being asked. True family story uploads every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one.